A Gentleman Needs No Introduction. How Robin Hood's Peasantry Leads to Chivalry by Audhinn Pelletier. Section 1. Who is Robin Hood? Robin Hood is an important myth about a hero who fights corruption in society to spread their wealth among the innocent. The institutions that he fights are those who boast their positive acclamation on society, only to deepen their pockets from the suffering of other people. Robin is a religious man who fights the abbey in A Guest of Robin Hood, and fights the Sheriff of Nottingham, another corrupt individual who abuses his power for his own personal gain. However, the question becomes if Robin Hood is a mere peasant or if he is a gentleman. In A Guest of Robin Hood appeals to a peasant audience by representing the values of a gentleman with how he treats the poor, the people he chooses to fight, and the freedom from society he and the merry men embody. Section 2. Arguments against his gentleman nature. The first argument against his side is the fact that Robin Hood in the early ballads is a clear-cut peasant. His wealth comes from nowhere else but the pockets of others that he chooses to steal from, or to make people pay for dinners. J.C. Holt proposes the argument that not one of the extant ballads presents the outlaws robbing a secular landlord, and not one is concerned with robbing the rich, whether clerk or lay, in order to give to the poor. Holt's argument presents the idea that Robin's refusal to steal money for the sole purpose of giving it to the poor does not qualify him as a gentleman. Holt's accusation is only partly true. Robin's sole purpose in the early ballads isn't just to give to the poor, but rather he fights corruption on both a macro level, such as fighting against the Abbey of Our Lady, and on a micro level, giving money to Gandolin. Another argument against Robin's gentleman capacity is the fact that he is a murderer in some regards. Instead of attempting to defuse situations, Robin tends to act out of self-defense and faces his opponents head-on. In the ballad Guy of Gisborne, Robin meets Guy and they immediately start fighting after Robin identifies himself. The argument here isn't that Robin defends himself against Guy, rather that he beheads him and carries his head on his spear. However, to combat this argument, William E. Simone says, Robin and Little John took the life of no man, unless either he attacked them or offered resistance in defense of his property. Robin wouldn't ruthlessly murder people that he met, otherwise someone wandering through Sherwood Forest, such as the Potter in Robin Hood and the Potter, would be killed immediately entering the forest, with Robin not caring about his wealth nor his character. Section 3. Arguments for his gentleman nature. To understand Robin Hood's gentleman nature, an understanding of what a gentleman in medieval times is must be understood. There are a few definitions of gentleman that apply to Robin Hood, such as Merriam-Webster's definition stating a man whose conduct conforms to high standards of propriety or correct behavior, along with a man of independent means who does not engage in any occupation or profession for gain. Analyzing the first definition, Robin Hood is an outlaw but is given no background in the early ballads, therefore no connections to his background that made him an outlaw can be connected to a lack of qualification as it were to be a gentleman. Following that, correct behavior is a subjective term that only fits within the societal expectations of correct behavior. In context with Robin, one party, namely the peasants of the time, will deem his acts of fighting against corruption as correct, whereas those affiliated with corruption will not deem them as so. The question then becomes, how can Robin Hood within the criteria of being a gentleman if he is not seen so by all parties involved? The first argument presented is on how Robin Hood conducts himself. In A Guest of Robin Hood, he awaits a guest to arrive to Sherwood Forest, he invites him to dinner, and then he asks him to pay for the dinner, as is Robin Hood tradition. When Robin and Gandolin feast, Robin asks him to pay, but the knight tells the story of why he is so poor, and Robin inevitably lends him 400 shillings. Here, Robin is presented with two options. Take the knight's 10 shillings and let him leave with empty pockets, or help the knight and continue his fight of corruption. When the knight tells Robin that the Abbey of Our Lady is attempting to steal his land, Robin takes this personally as a devout worshipper of the Virgin Mary. In the context of peasantry, this will be seen as correct behavior. But also Robin is not engaging in any occupation or profession for gain. Robin isn't going to get any money out of this except for a repayment. He isn't charging the knight for his kind deed. He isn't robbing the knight. He is simply sending the knight to teach the Abbey a lesson. Corruption cannot stand in the way of justice. With Robin's knowing of the fact he will not get any material wealth out of this, Simone nods to the notion of Robin being a gentleman opposed to a mere peasant. He says Robin will allow no man to suffer injustice, nor will he spoil the poor but rather enrich them from the plunder taken from the abbots. Peasants are those who have no money and come from the lower class, therefore will not have the manners of those with wealth. Robin, on the other hand, represents the upper class level of manners by taking the reward of the abbey, not ruining the life of a noble knight. The abbey mistreats Gandalin. He kneels before him, however, since he is an aristocratic knight, it is due to them to let him continue kneeling. With that, the abbot has not only refused to give the knight an extension to pay his dues, but the first question he asks upon his arrival is, "Have you brought my pay?" Instead of getting angry, the knight lets the conversation continue before presenting the money and paying off his loan, albeit with anger and resentment for the abbot. In A Guest of Robin Hood, Robin tells his merry men his very mission. He says to them, "No more shall you good yeomen that walk by the greenwood shaw, nay, no knight nor squire that will be good fellow." Robin tells his men from the beginning to not harm anyone that enters Sherwood Forest, in case they are good fellows. He instills courtesy amidst those that enter his land of the living rather than telling the merry men to attack anyone that enters. He understands that his woods are a passageway to or from Nottingham. Calling back to the definition of a gentleman, he must conform to high standards, wherein Robin does so by not initiating any fights unless a stranger entering the land does so first. This outright does not make him a gentleman by any means. However, it enables a conversation of why Robin would do this, and the answer points to the fact that he is a gentleman with the nobility of a peasant. He isn't from the upper class, and no background is given to determine whether it was once from the upper class or not, but he and Gandalin share the same level of courtesy for one another from their first meeting, and in Robin's donation, the knight matches his end of the bargain, making him a good fellow. Robin embodies gentleman nature with the people he chooses to fight as well. In Robin Hood and Guy of Gisborne, Robin and Guy meet at an archery contest, to which Guy tells Robin, not recognizing him, that he is actually looking for Robin. Instead of immediately fighting, Robin drops subtle hints that he is in fact the man that Guy is looking for. Guy, however, is the first to draw his sword and the first to swing. From there, Robin wins the fight against Guy and disguises himself to save Little John. In A Guest for Robin Hood, as well, Robin initially spares the sheriff's life rather than murdering him upon their first meeting. It is not only until the sheriff breaks their initial agreement, where Robin tells him that he will let him go if he promises not to come back. However, the sheriff goes to the king to ask for aid and inevitably attempts to arrest Robin again. This leads to Robin fighting and murdering him, but the principle of the matter is that Robin acted out of kindness and was betrayed. Nobility involves trust and mutual respect, both of which the sheriff destroys by breaking his promise and attempting to avoid the ramifications of his actions by trying to kill Robin. Another piece of how Robin relates to the nature of a gentleman comes from his occupation, or lack thereof. Robin does not engage in any occupation or profession for gain. There are examples of how this relates on a metaphorical level, such as being generous to Gandalin by loaning him money, and by being courteous and letting the sheriff live before he betrays Robin. But the question remains for the literal level of the definition. Robin lives in Sherwood Forest and does not have an outright occupation. His occupation, it could be argued, is that he is an outlaw. He makes his money by being an outlaw, but relating to the definition, he is not an outlaw for personal gain. Observing the text of A Guest alone, there is no background to ultimately determine if he chose to be an outlaw for the betterment of himself, but eventually he becomes pardoned by the king and stays in his court, only to return to Sherwood once again. This is the main argument for both Robin being a peasant and Robin being a gentleman. On one hand, Robin's desire to flee may stem from his feeling of inadequacy amidst the upper-class court, and therefore feels the mental paralysis of Sherwood Forest. However, in contention to this, it only emphasizes the gentleman nature of Robin more. To be a gentleman, Robin must not have any job out of personal gain, and therefore being bounded to the king's court not only deteriorates his gentleman ideals. To argue the paralysis of Sherwood Forest, the forest is generally an open space, but the king's court is more enclosed than the forest ever is. Therefore, Robin is put into a mental paralysis by being forced into a life of upper-class living. But that is not his goal in life. His goal is to be a gentleman of the peasants and for the poor, rather than a gentleman pawn in the king's game of corruption. One final argument that Robin Hood is a gentleman for the peasants, rather than a mere peasant, is found simply in the heart to listen to the ballads. A Guest of Robin Hood opens with, "Lithe and listen, gentlemen, that be of freeborn blood. I shall tell you of a good yeoman, his name is Robin Hood." The ballad opens with a call for gentlemen to listen. However, the upper class that refer to themselves as real gentlemen will not listen to the story of an outlaw, whose purpose is to fight against corruption and help the poor. J.C. Holt says that his audience is gentle and freeborn, meaning that Robin Hood may live the ideal peasant life of being a free outlaw that can fight against the system of corruption, but he embodies all aspects of a gentleman. He doesn't fight those that he doesn't need to. He doesn't specifically steal from the poor or the rich, rather from those who are corrupt, in hopes to instill a sense of self-realization within them. Holt continues, saying not one of the extant ballads presents the outlaws robbing a secular landlord. In the early ballads, Robin does not go out of his way to rob, murder, nor give money to peasants, rather that those good fellow he meet that deserve a chance to get on their feet will be met with that possibility if they are just that, good fellows. Section 4. Conclusion. In conclusion, Robin Hood is a gentleman from the social class of a peasant and for the likeness of peasants. He doesn't murder anyone that doesn't instigate the fight, rather will be truthful about who he is to see the reactions of those in search for him, insofar as letting the Sheriff of Nottingham go free in a guess of Robin Hood, only to be betrayed. Robin Hood's freedom stems from his desire to work no occupation for his own personal gain, rather important trait of being a gentleman, and therefore his stay in the king's court only counteracts his trait of being a gentleman. Lastly, Robin Hood's goal isn't to specifically help the poor, but to help those who so happen to be poor who are likewise good people, such as Knight Gandalin by offering him a loan. Robin Hood presents himself in the early ballads as a gentleman and doesn't embody any ideals of peasantry outside of being from the lower class due to being an outlaw. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my presentation, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.